we do. It's him in us and what he does in us and for us and through us. So thank you for that reminder that he's the one that holds us. Amen. Well, we're in John 11 this morning, talking about Lazarus. And there's a problem with that, because nobody preaches on Lazarus. I was raised in a pastor's home, church 3 times a week, back when you had sermons every service, so it wasn't Bible study, it wasn't discussion, it was sermons. I've heard thousands of revivals and camp meetings, I've heard thousands of sermons. I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on Lazarus. And there's a reason for that. Because this story is not about Lazarus. Yeah, it's the raising of Lazarus, if you're not familiar with John 11. But imagine with me for a minute that you're going to cast this as a play or a movie. What does Lazarus do in the story? He's mostly going, right? In the end, he shuffles on and shuffles off. That's literally all he does in the story. So you would give it to an extra. You wouldn't have your star as Lazarus. No speaking, not even really walking, just kind of stumbling around. It's not about Lazarus. The story is about faith. It's really about faith. So before we jump into the story, let's talk about faith for a minute. Probably the best, and I'm not talking about Dr. Brown's classic definition of faith. I'm talking about how do we know God exists? What makes us, how does faith in the general sense of believing in God exist? Probably the best explanation I've heard of faith is it's a bridge, but of faith, is that knowledge is a bridge that's always a little short of getting across the river. And faith is that last step. Okay, faith and knowledge are not like opposites. Faith doesn't operate completely apart from knowledge or evidence, but evidence never gets you quite all the way. And that's the fact, whether you believe in God or not. Now, let me quote Louise Anthony, who is a professor of philosophy at the University of Massachusetts, who is an atheist. And she says this: knowledge in the real world does not entail either certainty or infallibility. When I claim to know there is no God, I mean that the question is settled to my satisfaction. Right. To my satisfaction. That's why we can never get compelling evidence that will convince everybody. Because it's not the evidence, it's how you interpret the evidence that dictates whether you believe in God or not. The evidence is the same, the data is the same for a Christian as for an atheist. The atheist acknowledges there are things that science doesn't know, things that science doesn't explain, but they don't acknowledge there are things that science can't explain. Again, same person. I readily grant that we have cognitive limitations. In other words, there's things we don't understand. When we bump up against them, when we find we cannot explain something, the right conclusion to draw is just that we can't explain it. That's the proper place for agnosticism and humility. In other words, in her worldview, there's no room for God. She later says, I think the most logical conclusion is God simply doesn't exist. Supernatural things don't exist. Science, okay, going on with a quote. Since science is how we learn, paraphrase, not quote. Since science is how we learn about the material world, it's the only way to understand the world. That's a conclusion, not from data, but from worldview. Right. Okay? So when we conclude from our worldview that, well, everything has to be explained by science, then there's no room for the supernatural. And we'll never interpret the data to conclude that God exists. You with me on this? You understand? Faith is not a matter of evidence. It works with evidence. Evidence is there. But faith steps in to take that last step when you're like, okay, I have the evidence here. It's pointing me this direction. And faith has to complete that journey. Right. and which direction we go with it, whether we conclude God must not exist because there's so much evil in the world, or God must exist because there's design, there's something in my heart that desires something greater than this world. Faith steps in to complete evidence. Keep that in mind. Faith is a matter of evidence interpreted through worldview, through your experiences, your tendencies, your desires. All that plays into whether or not you have faith. That means that you can believe in Christ. There will probably come a time in your life when you'll hear the culture very loudly telling you Christians are Christians because of what they've been taught, because of emotion, because of personal desire. But atheists understand the evidence. And if you really look at the evidence, you would conclude God doesn't exist. And if you really take the extreme view of that, the conclusion is Christians are weak-minded because they can't really, they refuse to accept the evidence. But the fact is we all have the same evidence, the same data, and it's our decision and our worldview that pushes us to believe in God and respond to Him or not to. You with me so far? Okay, let's move on to John 11. We start, well, in John 7, we have Jesus, people in Judea getting mad at Jesus, and they try to stone him repeatedly. And that's the background. He goes to Galilee. He returns to Jerusalem, Judea secretly for the Feast of Tabernacles. Although he came secretly, and we're moving from John 7 on. He came secretly, but then he starts teaching, and people get mad again. They try to stone him again. Heals a blind man who is then kicked out of the synagogue. There's a rising opposition to Jesus in Judea, in the southern part of Israel. And then Jesus actually went to a city outside of Israel for a while, came back into Galilee. So he's in Galilee where they're not trying to stone him, all right? But he's there, he's teaching. And as we come into John 11, he's teaching and a messenger comes and says, hey, Lazarus, your best friend, is very ill. You need to come heal him. And verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister, Mary, and Lazarus. I believe President Loper just preached on Martha and Mary. Did you just? Not recently. Okay. I think I'm scheduled to then. Okay, it's supposed to be Friday. There we go. That's why things are confused. Okay, so quick prelude then. Good. I don't have to worry about repeating what he said. Good. He has to work around me on this one. I like that. That doesn't happen very often. Martha and Mary, think of their personalities. We have the story of them in the house. Martha is the hands-on, direct, get it done. All right? She's the one who's doing it. Mary's the one who's much more sensitive, listening to Jesus. Very different personalities, more quiet, probably an introvert. Likely. Martha's probably an extrovert. We don't know that for sure, but they seem that way. All right? And so we come into the story here, and they send the message to Jesus. Jesus says he's not going to die. It sounds like he says he's not going to die. The sickness is not into death. And stays there another day, then another 2 days. Then he says, okay, we're going to go back to Judea now. In verse 7. Then after that, he says, let's go into Judea again. His disciples say, Master, the Jews wanted to kill you last time you were there. Why are you talking about going there again? And Jesus says, he says, look, I know what I'm doing. 12 hours in a day, it's daylight to me. In other words, I know what I'm doing. Trust me on this. And comes down a little farther into verse 14. Jesus said to them plainly, look, Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes I wasn't there, but we're going to him now. Look at verse 16. Therefore Thomas, who's called Didymus, that means a twin, Thomas said to his fellow disciples, let us also go so we may die with him. Well, that's really encouraging. But notice Thomas here, he's perfectly willing to go. He said, we're going with them. We're going to die, all right? It's done deal. They'll kill him, they'll kill us. But I'm sticking with him. That's the first picture of faith we have in this story, is of Thomas saying, I'm going with him. We're all going to die, yeah, but that's okay as long as I'm with him. And that's what really becomes the key to this story of people's view of Christ. Thomas is actually an incredibly strong and faithful person in the Gospels. We think him as Doubting Thomas. I don't think he deserves that name. Because here he's like, hey, I'm going, all right? Now, he may be more of a pessimistic personality, but they're like, yeah, we're going with him. Right back into danger. So they go, they arrive, and as he gets there, close to it, they're told, Mary and Martha are told, Jesus is coming. True to personality, Martha takes off to meet him. Mary stays in the house. Martha takes off to meet Jesus, and told Martha, apparently not Mary. Sometimes we don't know this for quite sure. But Martha, when she heard Jesus was coming, went to meet him in verse 20. Mary stayed in the house. And Martha comes and says, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Think about that for a second. There's a mixture of faith, of disappointment, of hurt, and let's be honest, probably an element of accusation that, Jesus, if you'd come, this wouldn't have happened. Now, Jesus doesn't respond to the accusation as such. But if you'd just been here, why weren't you here? Ever felt that way? God, why didn't you act? Why weren't you here? How come you didn't do what I needed you to do? Jesus, you loved him. He was one of your best friends. Why'd you let him die when you healed so many others? There's pain there. There's anguish. But there's also faith. She's saying, I know you could have done this. So there's a mixture of faith and pain and hurt, accusation even, disappointment in this statement. If he'd just been here, he wouldn't have died. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, essentially what we would say in that situation, thank you for the comfort. I know he'll rise again at the resurrection. This is not the end. Death is not final. I understand that. And Jesus says, verse 25, Jesus says to her, I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, her brother just died. Her brother believed in him and had just died. And Jesus said, believe in me and never die. Now, put yourself in the story. Martha is in a place where she's not going to sit down and have a philosophical conversation. Let's think this through logically. She's hurting, a crisis in her life when she's hurting, grieving her brother, and now facing the man she had hoped would save him, and he just didn't. But look at her response. She doesn't say, oh yeah, I get that. She doesn't say, I understand what you're saying. She doesn't say, I don't understand you. She says, I have believed and continue believing. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God. Essentially, she says, if I can read into this a little bit, she's like, I have no idea what you mean by what you just said. She's not responding to what he said at all. It's like, I don't get it, but I still believe you. All right? I still believe you are the Christ. Whether I understand a word you said, whether you act like I think you should, whether you disappoint me or not, I still believe in you. That's Martha's response. I believe you are the Christ. You're the Son of God, the one who's come into this world. Even though you've disappointed me, I still believe you. And that's key to understanding this story. It's a story about how people respond to Jesus. Thomas saying, I'm sticking with him. Even if I die, sticking with him. Mary saying, I don't understand a thing you did or said, but I still believe you. Right. Faith is holding on. Faith is saying, I'm with him. I'm with Jesus, period. Whether or not I like what he does, whether or not I understand what he does, whether or not I understand what he says, I'm with him. That's faith in this story. When she said this, verse 28, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when Mary heard it, she got up quickly and came to him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her, when she saw that Mary got up quickly and went, they followed her. Again, let's get the picture, maybe a little more in depth than we usually think about this. Mary's gone to meet Jesus. No one apparently went with Mary. I'm sorry, Martha. Back up. Martha went to meet Jesus. We're not told anybody was with Martha. Martha's a strong one. Martha's the one who takes his hands on and deals with things, right? People don't realize she needs someone with her. Mary's the one who's more quiet and by the way, the strong hands-on personality still needs people, even though they might not seem like they do. Martha's the more quiet, the sensitive one. People realize she needs a network around her. So they're all there with her, comforting her. When she goes off to see Jesus, they go with her. Her support network joins her as she goes. The Jews who were in the house consoling her, when they saw she got up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. Then when Mary came to where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, and notice what she said specifically. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Exact same words Martha said. Now, chances are, it seems like the reason for this would be they've been talking about this. So again, I'm reading a little bit into it. But they've probably been talking about this a little bit, saying, if only he'd been here. And this is what's on both their hearts, both their minds, if only he'd been here. So they greet him with the same words, the same thing. Look at Jesus' response. He doesn't give Mary the description, explanation he gave Martha. When Jesus saw her weeping, the Jews with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled and said, where have you laid him? They said, come and see. And Jesus wept. His response to Martha was, Martha, trust me. His response to Mary was to cry with her. He responds to each person the way that person needs. He responds to you the way you need. That's one reason it's not safe or smart or wise or anything else to compare, well, God did this for this person. Why don't you do that for me? All right? God has the right to deal with different people differently, and that's okay. He gives you exactly what you need. Whether or not you realize it's what you need, whether or not it's what you think you need, he tailors his response to the person. So Jesus goes with them, and they find Lazarus, where they laid Lazarus, and people are saying, why didn't he save him? Now everybody's joining in the thought, why didn't he come and save him? He opened the eyes of the blind, he did miracles, he raised the dead. Why couldn't he have saved him here? So Jesus, again being deeply moved within, came to the tomb, stone against it. Jesus says, remove the stone. And Martha, hands on. Oh, no, you don't. No, we don't need that, all right? You're compounding we're grieving already. We don't need the smell of the decaying body to add to our grief as a tangible reminder that he's dead. You don't need that. And Jesus said to her, I told you, just believe, you'll see the glory of God. They remove the stone. Jesus prays, cries out, Lazarus, come forth. And the man who had died came forth. Why would John here call him the man who had died instead of Lazarus? He's emphasizing the fact he was dead. Like, he's just got a little note of, this is a guy who died, right? Remember the situation here, guys? This is a dead guy who now is coming forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, face wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said, unbind him, let him go. And Lazarus moves off the scene. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. Again, there's evidence. Faith steps into that evidence and says, okay, this makes sense. I can see now that right, the evidence is there. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus had done. Isn't that interesting? They saw the same thing. The evidence was there for both, was there. And yet some said, whoa, he really is a son of God. And others said, let's go tell the Pharisees what's going on. They're going to want to know about this. All right? Your response to God depends more on your decision, much more on your decision, on your worldview, than on the evidence. The evidence plays into it. I'm not denying evidence. There's a place for apologetics. Absolutely there is. But there's never going to be enough evidence to convince someone who doesn't want to believe, who chooses not to believe. That's not how it works. So the same thing happens, and one group says, wow, he really is a son of God. And the other group says, this is a problem. Let's go tell the Pharisees, the guys who tried to kill him several times already. Let's go tell them. And this is the point in the story of, in John's big picture story, when there's a sharp division. This is the point at which before this, the attempts to kill Jesus was sort of mob action. It was, they don't like what he's saying, they're going to try to stone him. At this point, it becomes an official decision by the Jewish leaders, we've got to get rid of this guy. Verse 47 and following, the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council. The Sanhedrin, if you know the ancient Jewish ruling council, composed of the high priests, Sadducees, as well as the leading Pharisees, they get together and they said, what are we doing? This man is performing many signs. They recognize the miracle. They're not denying that they couldn't deny the miracle. If we let him go like this, all men will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Isn't that interesting? Hey, he's raising the dead. We got to stop him. That's what they're doing. Because they've decided what their own place, their own position in the nation, their nation, but they're much more worried apparently about themselves because it's our place and our nation. Hey, if he goes on healing, the Romans are going to get wind of this. They're going to come and they're going to destroy us all. We've got to stop him. It's a little ironic. They want to kill the man who has power over death. He can raise the dead. Let's kill him. That makes a lot of sense. But wow, how ingrained into we've got to be the ones in charge in this situation. And if we're not, then the whole thing's going to fall apart. And therefore, we have to stop Jesus. We have to kill him. The high priest then says it's better for one man to die than the whole nation to be destroyed. Verse 53, so from that day on, they planned together to kill him. And the story moves on and to find someone to betray him when he's not surrounded by the crowds. He's private. We can capture him without causing a riot. And then, of course, Judas steps into the story and so on. And the story moves on to the crucifixion. This is the point at which, it's mind-blowing. This is the point at which Jesus performs his greatest miracle on earth, raising a man from the dead who'd been dead 4 days. And it's the moment when the high priests go, okay, now we got to actually take care of this guy. Because it's not about the miracle. It's about people's response to Jesus. And how we respond to Jesus sets the course of our life, sets the course of everything, how we interpret everything around us, how we understand how our direction, our perspective, everything about us is set based on how we respond to Jesus. Wrapping it up then this morning. Where are you in the story? Are you Thomas? I'm sticking with him. I don't expect anything good from him. Nothing good's going to come from this, but I'm sticking with him anyway. Well, that's faith. It could use a little help. Now we understand at that point it's Thomas saying, I expect I'm going to die, I'm sticking with him anyway. But that can become, later on, Jesus says to Thomas after the resurrection, he says, stop not believing. That's an interesting statement. A strange command. Thomas, you want to believe? Go ahead, stop refusing to believe. If you're Thomas, you're dedicated to Christ, but you're not expecting much good from him. People actually live that way? Yeah, it's possible to be that way. And let me encourage you, he has lots of good for you. If you're serving him out of duty, you're serving him. That's awesome. But he wants to bring you beyond that to expecting good from him. If you're Martha or Mary, you've been hurt. You're disappointed. Something's happened, or something's happened in your life. God hasn't come through like you thought he would, like you thought he should, and you're struggling. But hold on. Just hold on. Because he's not done. He's not abandoned you. He's doing something bigger than you realize. If you're one of the chief priests, turn around. All right? If you're starting to interpret everything around what's good for me, now that may not seem like right now it's going to turn you against Jesus. But that is a good for me motivation will drive you from God and from Christ every single time. And you may not want to acknowledge being one of the high priests in the story, but if it's all about how's it going to affect me, or I'm just, let's be sure that I'm just not really into this, right? The good thing is we can turn around from that. The gate's wide open. Jesus is still saying to you, I'm the resurrection and the life. You can come to me. You can trust me. You can believe in me. Wherever you are in the story today, come to him, hold on to him, believe in him, and it's about faith in him this morning. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver. Let's stand together. Run to him. Run to Jesus. Praise God. Father,